Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider. Hey, welcome to Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. I'm joined today with Mason once again. He's so hot and handsome.
I'm glad that I'm finally hot and handsome again.
Yeah, I had to say that since last time you gave me such a hard time about skipping that.
Squeaky wheel.
Squeaky wheel. Yeah. Yeah. Normally, I'm the squeaky wheel. You're not very squeaky normally.
No, not usually.
Not usually. Okay, so today our content's a little painful. It's going to be a little bit raw, I think, especially for Mason. Mason, would you say you're feeling a little raw?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How's that for a response?
Wow,
Yeah.
Riveting. Everybody's like ready to engage now. Everybody's like, whoa, what are they talking about today? Because wowza. We're going to explain what happened here in a little bit, but first I want to set our intention. And our intention is not to disparage any member of Mason's family. Our intention is not to attack their character or anything, but rather Mason had an experience with his family that I'm going to let him introduce here in a little bit. And their responses, unfortunately, were not surprising, which was still disappointing. We weren't surprised, but I think there was still a lot of disappointment and still a lot of hurt and pain that came with that. And one of the things that's occurred on my journey out of Mormonism and something that Mason's been exposed to as he's listened to some of the other post-Mormon podcast programs out there and the other ones, I mean, they don't even have to be post-Mormon, but just as he's also experienced this, is our experience in announcing certain things to family are that the negative response is pretty common. It's fairly familiar ground. So Mason, do you have anything you want to add to that about setting our intention before we dive into the story?
No, I think that's appropriate. People can say things that they'll regret when they're hurting or angry, and typically, I know I've heard you tell this to people before, if you're in that hurt space, maybe not the best time to broadcast it to the world.
Right.
But acknowledging that, I think that it's going to be helpful. I'm not incredibly good at being vulnerable or expressing my pain. And we'll see how I do today. But I certainly was having a hard time focusing on anything else as we planned for a coming episode. And I've tried to compartmentalize it the best that I can, but some of that anger has come out against my kids as well.
Mostly, you and Abby had a rough morning.
Mostly with the one child that I struggle with the most, or just the way that she responds and some of my underlying maybe neuroses is the right word. I don't know. Still just very grating. And when I'm in this kind of a situation, I don't do a good job of handling it. And I was able to back down on a couple of things and not be too terribly awful, but it certainly wasn't my best showing. So
yeah. Well, and I think it takes a lot of courage to admit that, hey, something happened to me last night that was really hard, that I'm still working through my feels on that. I'm in my feels, and then my special needs daughter, who struggles with some pretty strong belligerence and some oppositional behaviors, kind of pushed some buttons, and maybe you took a little bit more angst out on her in your redirection. And honestly, I'd say that it was a little bit more intense than normal and definitely more intense than what we're striving to do for her.
Right.
But also that you were able to recognize that and let me step in and take over. And that child just tends to respond to me better. Anyway, I get the younger girl. Mason gets the older girl when it comes to how those girls' relationships come. Katie's definitely a daddy's girl and just responds better to you, and it's vice versa when it comes to her daughter Abigail, for sure. So, yeah.
So here's where we stand, right? So today, this episode's going to come out in several weeks. When you hear this, of course, the stuff we talk about is old news, but today is September 5th. It is the first day that the full episodes have gone live on Spotify and around the world.
Right.
And
I think the word we're looking for is they launched. I think
they
live
launched
means
today.
we're actually like.
So the full
Different
episodes have launched today. Mm-hmm. And you and I have, of course, been excited about that. We're trying to get people to be able to be interested and be aware and listen or whatever. Of course, that brings us fulfillment, and we hope that it will bring others fulfillment too. I expect there'll be some people who will listen to 1 or 2 episodes and never listen again, and some people that will listen to a couple episodes and be hooked and feel something here is helpful for them. And that's, of course, what we're going for. But in anticipation of that, I wrote up a letter that I then texted to my family on a group text.
I'm going to slow you down a little bit. I think it's important for the audience to know that this isn't the first exposure for your family to the fact that we're doing a podcast. Like, I had told your mom about the podcast. 6 months ago, I had said that we were, getting things set up, that we were getting ready to do that and whatnot. And then it's been all over Facebook. Like, you've posted shares of some of the shorts and the promos that we had prepped in anticipation for launch. And there's Facebook ads going out, and because they're in your contact list and my contact list, for me, it wouldn't surprise me if they didn't see it on my feed, because I'm fairly certain that they have me as non-follow, like stay friends but don't follow, because I've broken all the apostate rules out there.
You are an apostate.
I am an apostate,
times,
yeah. But they knew that this was coming, so
it should have been a surprise.
Yeah, your letter wasn't necessarily a surprise. Oh, hey, we're doing this podcast, but rather meant as a invitation of, it's like the full episodes are going to be available. If you want to listen, great. If you don't, you don't have to. So did you want to read your invitation?
In the interest of full disclosure, I'm going to read what I wrote, because I'm going to then talk about some of the responses. And I'm open to criticism. I'm open to, hey, you probably could have worded that better. I had you read it so that, there's at least I'm not writing something I didn't intend. You know me better than anybody, and so you can kind of see my intentions and see how things go. So I had you read it, and but even our viewers, if you listen to this and you're like, whoa, I wouldn't have said that, I'm open to that. Please tell me, because I don't want to stir up contention.
Yeah, but I wouldn't have said that isn't super helpful feedback. Rather, I read this or I heard this and this is where my thought went. Do you think maybe you could reframe it? Is that what you're going for? Yeah.
Sure. That's obviously a better way to approach it. But even I wouldn't have said that, can be helpful. It's not as helpful as what you just described, but it can still be helpful. Mm-hmm. Mostly I just want people to know, and even my siblings, this wasn't meant to cause contention at all. And I thought that I had made that clear in this text. But anyway, you decide for yourself.
Right.
So I said, tomorrow the podcast that Sarah and I have put together goes live. You can find it on all the major podcast networks. It's called Unpacking Mormonism. There are some shorts available now, but the full episodes drop tomorrow and every Monday after that. I would love it if you can listen and support us. I feel like we've done a good job at approaching some very healthy and difficult material that, if understood, can be helpful on both sides of Mormonism and religion. We've tried to be non-biased. We've failed sometimes. We're trying to educate people on toxic situations that arise because of the way that religion can be formatted, delivered, and propagated. It's been a rewarding experience and helped to expand my perspective about the many places that people can be on their journey through life. Some of the material will likely be triggering for you if you choose to listen. I respect that a great deal and understand if you need to not listen right now. It will not hurt our feelings in any way. We want each of you to be in a healthy place. If the podcast can help, great. If it won't, please don't listen. We respect where you are. I love all of you so much. I wanted to send a personal invitation to you all. Mason.
That's a really good letter.
I thought so. I thought that I was informative. This is what we're trying to do. This is what we're hoping to accomplish. I admitted that we tried to be non-biased and that sometimes that was certainly not the case.
Right.
Because we're human, of course.
Right.
And then that last paragraph, look, if this isn't going to help you, don't listen.
Right. You gave them an out. You gave them the
Right.
opportunity to not engage if they didn't want to.
Right. I also didn't ask for a response from anybody. I didn't ask you to tell me if you're going to listen or not listen. I just said this is what's available.
Right. And you did it as a group text, kind of as the ease of, hey, family, this is what I've got going on. You're all invited. You do your thing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you needed or even intended for it to become an open discussion.
Right.
So.
I wasn't looking for positive or negative responses. I wasn't looking for responses at all. I just wanted to make sure that they were all available because it's something that I'm proud of.
Right.
And I know it's going to be triggering for some people. I put that in the letter.
Right. Well,
So-
and I think we've got to be really careful with that word triggering. We tend to toss it around a lot. And so, normally if I'm going to give a content warning or this could be triggering, I'm thinking that the topic of the podcast would be traumatizing in and of itself. But I do appreciate that you said some of it might be triggering in the sense that you might hear some things you disagree with. And so I kind of wonder a little bit if maybe you had used a different word there that was, you might hear some things you agree with and some things you disagree with rather than utilize that word triggering. But even still, it's not like you said the wrong word. That's almost that like in hindsight 2020.
Using the word triggering apparently triggered.
Yeah, I think using the word triggering apparently triggered some stuff because you definitely got some very amygdala brain spaced responses, which from some of your siblings. If they'd only listened
to some of our first podcasts,
right?
It wouldn't have been a big deal, right?
Listen to that. Well, no, it takes a lot. No, let's set a healthy expectational, reasonable expectation. Yeah, just because you're in your amygdala brain space does not mean you have the skills yet to respond differently. Sure. It's just one of the steps. But yeah.
This teaches us something about high demand religions, right? High demand religions tend to be triggered by any kind of criticism.
Well, and that's one of the, I know that Mormons don't like to be compared to a cult or say that they are a cult, but this is one of those areas where they are very much in that, what we would consider cult dynamics, cult culture.
Call yourself a cult. Don't call yourself a cult. The experts that have studied cults have demonstrated that this is one of the qualities of a cult.
Right.
If you don't like it, then change it.
Right, an inability to accept any kind of constructive criticism or the ability to be able to hear and hold space for an outside viewpoint. And that's definitely something that you got.
Well, and I want to point out, there was no criticism in this letter. There was no criticism to anybody. Now, if I say something like unpacking Mormonism, I get it. People in Mormonism are going to get ruffled right off the bat, but no one asked. Actually, let me take that back. Someone asked. My younger sister asked. She messaged me directly. She didn't respond on this text.
So I'm because we want to protect identity, and we're not going to be naming names. And there are people who are going to be listening to this who know your family. So we're not going to be giving names, but I think it would be important for you to like maybe number your siblings so that way our listeners can keep track, because you had one sister who responded with really some curious inquiry in order for her to establish a boundary for herself. You know, when you, and I'll call her sister number 2 because she responded second, versus sister number 1 who responded first.
That's just confusing.
It might be confusing, but anyway, so sister number 2 who responded second was able to say, you know, tell me a little bit about what's going on. Like, what's this about? You know, where are you at? And the other thing that sister number 2 had said later was, you know, I've got to make sure, I'm so exhausted taking care of what I've got going on in my personal life right now that I need to be able to find a time and a space where I can turn the podcast on and listen to it with, you know, some defense mechanism up. And that's that healthy protective defensiveness, not unhealthy defensiveness.
That's why I sent the invitation.
Right.
So that you would know what to expect and you could be prepared.
And she went on further to explain, I've got to be in the right brain space. Otherwise, this has the potential to put me in a place that I just don't have the emotional energy for.
Which is not what I want. It's not what we want. That is not what we're trying to do.
And so I would say, you know, sister number 2, her response kind of got swallowed up in the flames of the crazy responses. But I find that was a very healthy inquiry.
Yes.
It was appropriate questioning, you know, tell me a little bit more about this. What are some of the things? And then what we were able to do was we picked 2. Well, I picked, because you were busy managing the other stuff, but I picked 2 of the short clips. One that was like, hey, here's a little bit of a sample of what the psychoeducational side is. But then I also gave her the sample of the Russell M. Nelson, not exaggeration, embellishment is the word we use,
about it, right.
Where we talked about our interpretation of Russell M. Nelson's embellishment of that story. And I sent her that sample to be able to say, this is us when many people would consider what we're saying as being critical. And then here's a sample. I don't even remember the one I sent her. It was like a 1 or 2 minute one of the promos that was, and here's something where we're talking about neuroscience and psychoeducation.
Right. Nothing to do with Mormonism at all.
Right. This is kind of the feel. And I was like, from these 2 clips that are going to take about 6 minutes of your time, you should probably be able, and it should not meaning, not setting an expectation, but rather, you know, that should be enough information for you to be able to decide whether or not you want to engage more fully. So that way, because I know what's going on in sister number 2's life. She's raising a newborn baby with a blended family. There's been a lot of things going on for her.
She's got teenagers that are struggling with a divorce. And
I mean, there's a lot going on. There. And so for me, I don't want her to have to get on Spotify and sift through hours of content, which is going to feel overwhelming. And so I appreciated her questions because it was like, you know, I'll listen, I'll give it a shot. And so I was like, here's 2 samples. Here's one that I don't think would be triggering for you at all. And here's the second one where we kind of dig in a little bit to the prophet, which if you're within Mormonism, criticizing the church is one thing. Criticizing the prophet, you want to get a whole level of really intense responses. And so I really appreciated that inquiry. And also she checked in later individually. So she initially responded in the group text, which I was not a part of because I had asked you don't add me in there. Because I felt like there have been enough issues. Your family definitely, many members of your family really don't like me, and they never really have for whatever reason.
Despite what they might say.
Despite what they will say to my face. Well, they've told me both to my face. I mean, your dad has told me on at least 3 occasions, and I think 4 straight up, that he doesn't like me, that first impressions are hard to get over. And I have no idea. Like I have no frame of reference for what I did. I am clueless as to what I've done, other than I was very outspoken and a little bit of a know-it-all, but I was 18 when we got married. So I would have expected that to change. But yeah, it's been really interesting. So sister number 2 and you, me, and sister number 2, I would say we've done a lot of work over the years to foster healthy relationship patterns, because then she reached out to us privately later and said, hey, if what I said was offensive, I'm really sorry. That wasn't my intent. This is where I am. And that gave both of us that ability to be like, we're not offended at all. We really appreciate those questions. We think that's great. We don't want to overwhelm you if you're not in a place to listen. We respect that 100%. And thank you for reaching out.
Well, and some people that come to this podcast overwhelmed, they might find some comfort in what we have to say. Other people are going to come to this podcast overwhelmed, and they're not going to get anything of value from it because they're just not in a good space for it. And that's the case for this sister, is that she wants to be able to dedicate the emotional time and commitment to it if she's going to do it. She doesn't want to just listen. She wants to be able to understand and give it its due.
Well, and I think it's healthy for us to say, if our content is not something that you are interested in, willing to, or able to consume at this time or ever, we want you to know that that doesn't change our relationship. We're okay with that. Yeah. And I like that, because I feel safe with sister number 2 for her to be able to have boundaries, for us to identify what her boundaries are and to honor them, for her to look at us, know our boundaries, be able to identify those, her honor our boundaries, and for us to still get along and have a great time together. And if there's topics that we need to avoid, which I don't really feel like there are with this sister, I feel like we could talk about pretty much anything, and because
we would be like, I can't talk about that right now. Right. If something came up we didn't want to talk about, we would set a boundary and it would be honored. Right. Exactly.
And so I think it's really important, as we get ready to jump into kind of the more intense and difficult, I keep wanting to say the crazy response, but that's really an inappropriate term to use. But I am going to own, that's why I keep hesitating, is because my mouth is wanting to really label that in an unhealthy manner. And I apologize. I'm going to own that. But those more intense amygdala type responses, I want to come out and say, you know what? When family is starting to navigate mixed faith or faith crises dynamics, there are lots of different responses. For my family, they were basically crickets. It was basically silent. It was like, oh, all right, cool. Thanks for letting me know. And we moved on. And it was so dysfunctional in other areas that
there was no room to care about this.
It didn't hurt it, but it didn't help it. It whatever. Right. But with sister number 2's response, that was kind of really, I would say that's the ideal response, in the sense of, I'm not really sure. Here are my boundaries. I want to support you. I need some time. And she left things open for communication. And so I want to say...
And she followed up to make sure that what she said wasn't offensive. And I didn't feel anything that she said was even potentially offensive. But she followed up because she is emotionally aware enough to recognize that the possibility is there. And I appreciated that. You just listed basically all the positives about the way that she responded. And I think that that's good. And
well, when you say positives, I want to just clarify. She responded in a manner that promotes healthy dialogue within relationships.
Yeah, that's what we want, right? We want curious questions. We want you to be able to talk about your boundaries and where you are right now. Right. I want you to be able to say no. Like if you look right at me and say, no, I'm not going to participate in that, I don't have any problem with that. I respect that. That's a boundary. Right. I made allowances for that in the very first post I sent, right? If you don't want to listen, if you don't think this is going to be helpful for you, please don't listen, is what I said. Right. Like, please don't. I'm not here to change your opinions about Mormonism. I'm not here to affect your testimony. I'm not here to do any of that. I'm here to talk about toxicity that exists and help us to understand it better so that we can improve processes. In the reality, What I talk about to healthy, true believing members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, what we talk about can only improve that organization.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about abuse. It can only improve that organization. Right. We talked about understanding amygdala responses and your fight, flight, freeze, blah, blah, blah. Your fight, flight, freeze, fawn response.
Yeah.
And that can only help people. And so while some of the material might be just a little bit triggering, which I get, we've not done episodes because of the things that I'm still triggered by. I get all of that. Yeah. But the end goal is, let's make the situation, let's make the process, let's make the organization better.
Yeah.
So thanks for starting with the positive response there. I appreciate that from that sister.
Go sister number 2. We love you.
My other sister did the same thing. She started with a curious question. At least it felt curious. You haven't even, I don't know if you remember it, but it was
No,
it was
I do. The one
simple,
that she sent you individually, not...
The very first thing she sent me individually is, can you help me understand what the podcast is going to be about? And I did. And it was lengthy. I told her what we talk about. And she said basically something along the lines of, yep, that's what I expected. I'm not going to be able to listen to that. And if she had stopped right there... Fine. Like, I completely respect that. Instead, she says...
we actually talked a little bit about that when we were recording yesterday, because you got that text back from sister number 1, and we're calling her again sister number 1 because she responded first. And I kind of chuckled and went, I'm bracing myself for sister number 1's response.
Right.
And you had shared that it was, and I don't know if you had shared that. I don't remember if we recorded that response or...
I don't remember the timeline
or if
either.
you had, or if we just talked about it later and you were like, she asked and then she said she couldn't do that because something along the lines of that you, Mason,
said,
were
I'm
going
headed down a road she can't follow.
Yeah, Mason is heading
down a road.
I
also respect that. Like, that's a boundary, right? If you don't like where I'm going and you don't want to be in that same place, that's a boundary. I respect that. But then she followed it up with, let me just actually read it, because this is kind of an important piece here of what she said. She said it does. So I asked, does it make sense? When I explained it, she says it does. It sounds like what I expected it to be. I'm not going to be able to listen. You're going down a road I cannot follow. Then she says, here are some questions that I have if you're really wanting to acknowledge toxicity.
Right, which is really, that's kind of a passive-aggressive... Like, if you really want to know what's toxic, let me tell you. So it's kind of a passive-aggressive statement. And I don't know if that's how sister number 1 meant it. And what were those questions?
Why is the title Unpacking Mormonism? But the problem is, she doesn't want to know.
Right. Well, because unpacking is a therapeutic... cliche.
She doesn't want to know.
For digging into stuff.
I don't even want to talk about why it's unpacking Mormonism because she doesn't want to know. Right. It was an attacking question. Well, why is it unpacking Mormonism?
Whoa. I'm going to slow you down because now you're adding inflection in the reading. So what do the words actually say?
So why is the title Unpacking Mormonism? What is Mormonism, quote unquote, to you? The very title is toxic, and that it's attacking an entire religion for the few that are not following Christ wholly. I didn't add an inflection that I didn't feel that came from the follow-on questions.
Right, and I knew that, but I wanted to make sure our listeners got that full message.
Appreciate that too.
So can you read that whole section again? What's sister number 1, when I'm going to ask you questions, if you really want to, start right there. Where
here are some questions that I have if you're really wanting to acknowledge toxicity. Why is the title Unpacking Mormonism? What is Mormonism to you? The very title is toxic in that it's attacking an entire religion for the few that are not following Christ wholly. Mormonism is the religion, the principles, not the people, not even the policies, the principles. Now, let me explain why I said she doesn't want an answer. If you'll notice, why is the title Unpacking Mormonism? ? What is Mormonism to you? ? The very title is toxic, period. Right? She's answering her own question now.
Right.
She is making assumptions. She asked the question as an attack against me.
You felt like it was an attack against you.
Yeah, and I think that is, it's clear to me from the way that she wrote that that's what is intended. I will make allowances that that's possibly not the case.
So I'm gonna set a boundary here. When we utilize Dr. John and Julie Gottman's relationship, communication, whatnot, curriculum, there's the word I'm looking for. I find as I listen to these, Mason, I'm like, wow, I use a lot of whatnots and so forths, and I sound like an idiot. And absolutely.
We say absolutely a lot.
I know.
We say right a lot.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And woohoo.
We don't say you woohoo a lot. We've talked about it once.
Oh,
or
more
twice.
than once, yeah. Anyway.
But we don't say it a lot.
Yeah, anyway, so one of the things that is really healthy when utilizing the research from Dr. Gottman, both of them, is that you want to talk about your experience and how you perceived it. If you're going to break it down based on punctuation and put intention behind sister number one's purpose, we are going to be wrong in some way on some point because we are not inside sister number one's brain. And so I'm going to challenge you to be able to say, exactly what you did. It says, what is unpacking Mormonism? ? How do you define quote unquote Mormonism ? And then the next statement, period. Then I would challenge you to say, I perceived this to mean, so that you're talking about your interpretation of what you saw, what you read, what you experienced. That way we're speaking from a reality-based place. We're not projecting emotions onto other people, and we can allow the listener to make their own judgments. And that is really the best way for us to protect the integrity and the relationships as we continue to move forward through this.
I think that is incredibly fair. And one of the reasons we decided to process this on a microphone is because I'm absolutely certain that some, if not many of our listeners have gone through something like this.
Absolutely.
And so...
Dang it! I just Go ahead.
Hey, it's the word. I'm absolutely certain that some of our listeners have gone through something similar.
Yeah.
And we're about tools. We're about processing and learning how to deal with these kind of hard things in a healthy way. And that's really what we want to get to. So when you point out that I'm making a judgment call about what was written, I think that's healthy. That's important for me. My judgment call may not be incorrect, but it might very well be incorrect. And that's not what I want to do. I don't want to condemn my sister for what I'm getting from her message, because that's not healthy. And I still have hope that relationships can be worked through in this. Otherwise, I don't think it would hurt the way that it does. And so, I don't want to make that judgment call. So I appreciate you saying that. She goes on, of course, and she makes those questions that feel like they're an attack. They don't feel any more like curious questions.
Right.
They're questions that she sends forth and answers for herself. And then I answered too, and mostly, I kept my answers very even. I just explain.
Are you comfortable reading what you said?
I am, sure. So she says the very title is toxic in that it's attacking an entire religion. Mormonism is the religion, the principles, not the people, not even the policies, the principles. So I said Mormonism is everything associated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Doctrines, policies, people, organization, principles, all of it. Where do those things belong if not in the church that espouses and creates them? We don't attack Mormons at all. This is me talking about the podcast again. We do not attack character. We don't really attack the church as a whole either. We simply call attention to things that happen within religion that are causing harm to others. Again, I respect you not wanting to listen. I want you to be in a peaceful place for you and your family. I have zero desire to take that from you or even to try to do so. Love you, sis. Then she says, this is Jesus Christ Church. You're defaming it. The podcast could and should be called Unpacking Jesus Christ Church, because that is what you're doing. And then I said, I respect that you feel that way and honor that feeling. And that was the end of that conversation there.
And I think my response was, that would be an excellent title for a future podcast. And I give permission to any podcast creators out there. If you would like to take that title, you go for it. Unpacking Jesus Christ's Church. Mostly because, and I know that sounds like I'm being snarky. So let me clarify.
Snarky?
Yeah,
You?
me snarky.
This is
yeah.
a new experience for me. Wow. Hold on. Don't
so
say
full of
anything. I need to sit in this for just a minute.
Oh, no.
Snark. Where does our daughter get that from again?
Oh, it's from you for sure. All of her sass.
Do you smell that? What
I
does that
do.
smell?
It's bullshit.
Did you step in something?
It
oh,
is. It's
okay.
bullshit. So, no, absolutely. So, no, I know that came off a little bit snarky, but one of the things that's interesting is that, again, unpacking is kind of a trendy term within behavioral health to mean I've got a whole bunch of stuff stuck in this suitcase and it's so tightly packed in there that I can't really get to anything. I don't understand where, one end of my legging begins and the other end of my legging ends, kind of like a spaghetti bowl. And so let's take these pieces out, let's put them back together, and let's see, are there things that I don't want to put back in my suitcase? Are there things I want to carry with me in my suitcase? So it's kind of a shortened analogy, and that's what we're doing. And I would agree, Mason, our intent is not to attack the Mormon Church. However, we both understand that many people are going to perceive that that's what we're doing. We haven't been very kind to some of their policies, specifically surrounding the sexual abuse stuff. Right. And again, I think that is a call of action for change. Yeah. But again, not an attack on Mormonism, the people, or even the
If it's a fluffy...
I'm having a hard time finding my words because I really want to attack them sometimes. So that's why I'm going to mess up sometimes.
If it's a fluffy minor policy, why are we talking about it? And if it's a major policy that causes harm, why are we not talking vigorously about it?
Right.
Why are we not getting angry about it? Because we're talking about people getting hurt.
Right. And then our goal is to be able to help people see they're not alone.
Yeah.
And here are some things that you can do differently. I think what you did really well in your response, Mason, is that you read the room. You recognized sister number one is not in a place where she wants to have a dialogue. It is shut down the conversation, you be quiet, and kind of that shaming statement, you might as well say that this is what it is, because that you have a deep respect. You, Mason Westbrook, have a deep respect for Jesus Christ as your personal savior. Like, that is a very sacred, special thing for you. And so for that to be the attack on you, that's really unhealthy. It's a very disrespectful, passive-aggressive, in my opinion, a very passive-aggressive approach to expressing concerns. Now, having said that, I think both you and I last night, when you shared that with me, before we went home and all hell broke loose, was she's doing the best she can with the communication skills that she has developed so far in her life. And that she's absolutely responding from a place of defensiveness. Yeah. Because she hasn't taken any time to get those questions answered or to listen to a short to kind of see what things are about and to make that determination after some mild exposure.
I can respect that where she's coming from, she feels like I'm attacking Jesus Christ.
Right.
I can respect that. I don't think it's true, but I can respect that that's where she's coming from. Mm-hmm. And that's why I can hold a place for that, and why I was able to respond with just, "Hey, I respect and honor your feelings on that matter." So I have to, if I want to be able to process this, I have to be able to try and understand where they're coming from and why the comments were made as they were made. And let me just kind of then segue that into the second piece here, is that in that letter that I sent, I made absolutely zero declarations about my testimony or my feelings about the Mormon Church. I didn't say anything that said where I am or anything like that. And to follow that up, because one of the responses that I made to this crap show that we had was that, was just that. No one in this string knows anything about where I am with the church.
Right. They're responding because
they made the
your
assumption,
relationship with me.
Well, and there's probably lots of reasons why they're making that assumption. And again, if I try and see it from their perspective, I can better understand where they are. But there was it didn't feel like there was any attempt on their part to understand where I am.
Well, you say their part. I think it's going to be important to say. So if we're sticking with
specifically
the order
with
that
two different
siblings
people
responded. So we have sister number one, and then we have brother number one. And again, in order of responding here, brother number one is the brother that sent me the scathing, your marriage is doomed.
Right.
I'm going to ruin you. Right. You know, the same way sister-in-law ruined other brother-in-law.
He's a really good person, but he can be a real bear when it comes to expressing his opinion.
Bear is a very generous term, in my opinion. But yeah, so, oh, shoot, I just lost my train of thought. Brother number two that responded from a place of, hey, it's okay for us to have different opinions, and maybe you need to reevaluate. You know, he was speaking to brother number one. Brother number two says you need to evaluate how you said that. You're sounding kind of arrogant. And so you did have healthy responses from family.
Yes, I
so
did.
When you say their response, I want to make sure that you are keeping that within.
That's a good clarification, because mostly the negative responses came from the sister number one that we've already talked about, because then she did chime in on
and
this
then her
text.
husband.
And her husband and this brother number one, the first one to respond, ironically, the one that accused me of starting a fight. I don't see anywhere in that text.
He blamed you for the entire toxic exchange
because
that
I
occurred
should have
later.
known that everyone was going to respond this way. Well, you said one of the first things that you weren't surprised by the responses, neither was I, and that's part of why it hurts so much, because I was hoping for better. I took a lot of time to write that letter so that it would not be a fight pick.
Right.
And so then to get accused of being the one that caused all of this, mostly it hurts because that means he can't see what his words do. And we have experience with that.
Oh, and many times. Mm-hmm.
I've had phone conversations with him too that are mostly positive, but it displays this idea that in that phone conversation, he says, sometimes I'm an asshole and you just kind of have to deal with it. And I disagree with that thought process for anyone.
Well, you can deal with it, but if you're consistently choosing to be an asshole, it's going to damage familial relationships.
Right. That puts it puts all the onus on me. In order to have a positive conversation with him, I have to deal with him being an asshole. And most of the time I choose that because I want to have a positive relationship, or we just don't talk about anything important.
Right. Well, and I think it's important to identify here that brother number one responder blame shifted.
Yeah.
there was a lack of accountability. And unfortunately, that behavior is modeled within the church. We didn't handle this right. Well, we're not going to talk about it. We're just going to cover it up. We're just going to move forward. Right. If you hadn't brought it up, then this wouldn't be an issue.
Right.
So your brother
opinion,
gaslit you a little bit in the sense of you picked the fight by bringing it up. And it's like, I picked a fight by inviting my family to listen if they wanted to, and letting them know that if they didn't, that was okay.
Right. And I imagine, again, that people listening today have been in that situation before where that happens. And that's mostly why I bring it up. Like, I don't have any desire to discuss his issues on this podcast because that's not our place.
Right.
More how we deal with it and how to recognize that it's going on. If I'm not averse, again, I'll say it again, I'm not averse to going back to my letter and going, wait, did I do something that picked a fight? And I did. And I've oftentimes taken accountability.
Wait a minute. Are you saying you've done that in the past or you did something in this letter?
No, I went back to the letter is what I'm saying.
Oh, you went back and reviewed
to
make sure, was there
to
something
make sure
that
there
could have
wasn't
been
something.
perceived? Got it. Well, and there's a dynamic here of you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Like, well, I didn't know you were doing a podcast or whatever. Well, I can't tell you that I'm doing it because if I tell you, then it's going to be perceived as me picking a fight.
So the second piece that I went into, that segue to the second piece, no one on this chain of texts knows where I stand with the church.
Right.
And I told them, this is why. It's not safe for me to tell you.
Right. I can't come to you and say, hey, I'm really struggling with the fact that the church covered up some of these troubling historical things, and maybe I taught some things that were complete lies on my mission, and I wasn't lying. I didn't know any better, and I'm really bothered by that, but I still feel like my presence in the church is important and valuable, and it helps me get closer to my Father in heaven, and it works really well in my life, and it doesn't work for Sarah anymore, and so that's been a little interesting as we've shifted these dynamics, and you can't do that with your family because they don't give you space.
I don't
for
recall,
being outside the prescribed
I don't recall a single conversation with that brother where anything specific about concerns about the church were brought up. I don't recall that. Now with that sister number one, the one that also attacked me, I have had a conversation with her, but nothing important was brought up because these people like this tend to want to avoid the issues and just testify. And that's exactly what happened with my brother.
But let's give an example of that with sister number one who responded. So when you and I...
Can I just give that example with brother number one because he was the very first one to respond, or do you have something different in mind?
Oh, I had a different story. Okay, but if do you want a paper, rock, scissor? Like we'll see who goes first. This is like the healthiest.
This could
in
be
clinic,
good. Right.
I tell my clients when they can't decide who goes first, this is how we solve all major marital issues. Ready?
Wait, is the Spirit going to guide this one so we make sure we talk about the right thing first?
Yes, the Holy Spirit of God is going.
Maybe she did get this right for me.
The Holy Spirit of God is going to own our rock, paper, scissor. 1, 2, 3, shoot. 1, 2, 3, shoot. We're tying. Great minds think alike, and so do ours. 1, 2, 3, shoot. 1, 2, 3, shoot. I win.
All right, so tell your story.
That's really funny. All right, so my story is when you and I went on our cruise to Belize, we got picked out of the crowd to play the Love and Marriage show. And we won that competition by making out the best in the audience. So they picked out the
we were good.
We were amazing. We can kiss. And no, it was actually really funny. So they picked the, most newlywed couple, and I think they had to go by minutes. It was like what time, what minute. So like the newlywed couple had only been married for
a couple days or
like
something. Yeah, it wasn't very long.
A day and a half or whatever it was, right? And then they got the oldest couple, and they'd been married over 60 years. And then they said, okay, we need a couple that's been married longer than the day and a half and less time than the 60-something years. And the way we determine that is by who can basically kiss the best. And I think the reason we won is because you didn't realize you had your hand on my leg, and as you were moving that up, you didn't realize you were underneath my skirt because I had on some longer shorts underneath it because, we're on a cruise ship, and I didn't want my skirt to pull a Marilyn Monroe and flash my panties to everybody. But as we were making out, your hand, as you slid that up my shorts, not realizing you were under. So I think people got a little flash of my of my shorted booty. Like, think spandex shorts, y'all. These are not fancy panties. They were like spandex biker shorts underneath. So anyway, the audience cheered the loudest for our making out capabilities. We got up there, and as a thank you for the show, everybody that had been brought on stage won a bottle of champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries that were then delivered to their room later. And you and I, we had so much fun on that show. It was an absolute blast. We were dying laughing.
Aside from one of the bad questions I answered, it was really fun.
Yeah, so I think the longest married couple, I think he went home and had to sleep out on the deck somewhere because he got himself in trouble. But no, we had so much fun, and it was fun walking around the cruise ship after that. The people that had been there were like, oh my gosh, you guys were amazing. That was so much fun, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And so we took a selfie with our bottle of champagne and shared that story on Facebook. And it's sister number one who chastised you for not avoiding the appearance of evil because you posted your picture with champagne. Now, subsequently, we didn't drink that champagne because you don't drink. And
right.
I had
and
a
you
surgery.
Can't handle bubbles.
I can't do bubbles. Yeah, I had
right.
a surgery to fix GERD. It's called a fundoplication or a Nesson procedure. And if I drink soda, the bubbles just make me look pregnant. I can't burp
and
them
miserable.
up, and then I'm just miserable. So neither one of us drank the champagne. Now, I downed those strawberries. Those strawberries were phenomenal.
Yeah.
And we gifted the champagne to some friends who would enjoy it. So neither of us drank the champagne. Oh, and she was upset because you took a picture of me scratching my forehead with my middle finger up as a joke. I was flipping you off. And she, instead of saying, hey, Mason, how are you doing? I'm really concerned, blah, blah, blah. She had reached out to you with, you were a bishop, and what are people thinking about you? And
well, to be fair, she did start with, are you okay? Or something like that. But I didn't have any context for why she was asking that question. And
fine.
It ended up that she was concerned because of what you just said. So,
right, because we had posted a picture showing off our trophy of unopened champagne for having made out the best in the audience and having a fun night laughing on a cruise ship.
Right.
It was really
well,
sad.
and there's lots of different ways to approach that situation. It didn't seem genuine. It seemed more scrupulous.
Yeah, it appeared very judgmental.
Right.
I mostly laughed.
Right,
I was busting up in the corner just in a fit of giggles.
Right. And it didn't
going,
bother me
I don't
either.
miss the snowflake bubble at all. I think that was
Right.
the bubblies in the champagne must have been snowflake bubblies because they're still in the bottle. They haven't popped yet.
Right.
Yeah.
So Anyway, so that's what happens. And kind of what I had gone to is that people who aren't interested in hearing the hard stuff always write it off and go right to testimony.
No, not always. Rephrase that without your all-inclusive word.
In general, the people who do not want to hear this stuff write it off and go to testimony. They just want to testify to you that, well, I know if you just stay righteous and just keep trying, things will be okay. And I don't have any issue with that kind of thought process. For some people, that can be very helpful. but it doesn't deal with any of the issues, and it's not curious.
Right.
It doesn't get curious about what's going on, and that's what happened with my brother. So his very first response was something along the lines of, the gospel has brought me the two most important things in my life, and I would die before I give them up, and I don't have any interest in what you have to say.
Yeah.
And the reason that stung, again, he doesn't know anything about what we're talking about.
Right.
So
They're making an assumption.
right, this could be unpacking Mormonism is, let's help people understand the doctrines of the gospel better. It could be that.
Right.
They haven't asked. He doesn't ask. He doesn't know. He doesn't care. He just assumes because of where you are.
So again, it doesn't feel like he cares.
Thank you.
He
It
verbalized that
like,
he hasn't listened. This is the same brother that berated me for posting anti-Mormon whatever, and had never read a single post in response to his wife saying that she was uncomfortable with a post.
So it feels like he doesn't actually care about the issues. He just doesn't want me to get in his space with the bad things. I respect that. Again, if you don't want to hear these things, I completely respect that. I've been there. I understand that.
Wait. You've
There's
been there?
some days I'm still there. We talked about it last night.
Yeah.
You know, I think what I said is I almost wish I could just be ignorant again. And I feel that way sometimes because the journey has just been hard and I don't know where I stand right now.
And you're not alone in that. There's a lot of people.
I'm sure
there's a lot of people who are like, I wish I didn't know what I know now because this has really damaged my relationships and I can't take it back.
Life has enough upheavals on its own.
Right.
When we cause upheavals or feel like we cause upheavals of our own, it's rough. And
when we talk about if a religion or a practice of a religion or the leaving of a certain religion causes this much upheaval in families, there's an issue there. There's something, and I'm not saying that's the church's fault, although I feel like the teachings and the policies and the way that they view things absolutely influences that, because this is a normal story. What you're sharing, thousands of stories. I mean, John DeLynn talks about
not
thousands of stories, not exclusive to Mormonism.
Absolutely a part of Mormonism.
Right. This is a pretty common dynamic when people leave the Jehovah's Witnesses.
I've talked to other people who are members of different faiths that
Jewish families
say that this is kind of what they got.
This is a normal thing across all religions. And when our dogmatic practices or our doctrines and whatnot make it so that we are cutting people out, we're silencing people who are important to us, there's an issue. And I'm not saying it's with the religion. Maybe we need to look at the family. Maybe we need to look at other dynamics. Maybe you are posting things that are absolutely horrible. I don't know. But this is just so common in these high demand religions that it's really concerning. And once again, another characteristic of a cult where we shun the people who are leaving and don't agree with us and identify them as dangerous, because later on, sister number one basically said that you were like Laman, Lemuel, or Cain. Yeah. And that she couldn't engage with you because you were Laman, Lemuel, or Cain. And that's where I let my mouth get the best of me.
Well, and again, I will call attention to the fact that she doesn't know where I am.
Right. So do you want to read some of those, Mason? Because we're talking about it, but let's give some context.
I didn't really write down those texts. I just wanted to pull out pieces that are the kind of toxic things that stop a discussion rather than allow for discussion.
Are
So,
you comfortable reading like that sentence out of the text or that piece and not the entire thread, or is that...
well, I'm not uncomfortable doing any of it. It's just kind of a long train, and I didn't want to try and find stuff along the way.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you think that it would be helpful
Well, here,
to
why
the
don't you
understanding
keep
of
talking?
others.
How about, yeah, I think that giving the context so that the listeners can make their own judgment rather than just hearing us go back and forth is going to be beneficial. But I don't want to share things that you're not comfortable with because it is your family. But if you hand me that phone, you can go through your points and then I'll find one and slide it back to you.
So, and I just want to then, it's ironic to me that the reality of where I am is that I'm not sure where I am. Like, there's still some things that really resonate with me, and there's some things that don't. I'm angry about a lot of things. I'm managing some of the historical stuff and some of the things that don't make sense, but it's not really about what makes sense for me. It's about what's causing pain to other people unnecessarily. And so that's my struggle. And so then the response of my siblings, as if they understand where I am and making judgment calls about that, again, not surprising, but very painful. And I mostly wanted to share that because, for one, I'm not very good at being vulnerable. And so I'm practicing that. And for two, I want to be able to connect with those of you who are listening who've gone through the same thing. This is difficult, and I am not through it. I haven't really processed it yet in my own life. I'm not in a very good place. It was ironic. Sarah and I were working on planning for a different podcast, and I just wasn't finding my place in it because this is really one of those that is very educational.
Right, it's very clinical.
From you. It's a very clinical piece, and I'm understanding the clinical piece of it, but I was not understanding what needed to come from the Mormon side of things to help tie things together, and it just wasn't coming. So we were working on it, and then you said something, we were talking about just where I was, I guess. I don't remember what spurred it, but you said, well, do we need to just process this today? And I said, well, what do you mean? He's like, let's go and record and process this. And I thought about that for about 2 seconds, and I said, yes. And I actually started to cry just a little bit. I'm not sure if any tears fell because my water ducts don't work quite right, I guess, but I was crying, and it was hurting. And
yeah,
some of it is just learning to feel my emotions. In the past, I very much would have just kind of shut this stuff off and just move forward. And I'm grateful that I've learned how to just kind of feel. I'm
right.
working on that. So one other piece, and you mentioned it, is that my sister number one. So let me just explain. So the first thing that happened was brother number two says...
Right, brother number two says, and I'm going to read that. I've got it right here. He says, I am not interested in what you have to say, Mason. I have made up my own mind, and I will die before I abandon it.
That's brother number one.
And your response to brother number one was, I'm glad you're in a happy place, brother. I think it's wonderful. And that's all you said. And then, let's see, where is it? I just had it a minute ago.
Then brother number two says you need to be careful in the way that you're defending or stating your testimony, essentially, because that's what he did. It sounds arrogant. And I can agree with that. Sometimes surety sounds arrogant. My sister number one, says it's not arrogance, it's surety, and it's okay. And that really kind of stung to not me so much as just that's ignorant. It's not arrogant necessarily. Well, it's arrogance and ignorance in this case.
Right.
Because you believe something is sure does not mean you don't pay attention to what your words do to other people.
Right. Well, and then what happened here is brother number two says, why would anyone have to think about whether they want to hear their own brother's opinions? And sister number one responds, she says, brother number two, in reply to why would anyone have to think about whether they want to hear their own brother's opinions, I have a few examples. Laman and Lemuel, Abel and Cain.
Yeah. And
I was shocked. That's where, for me, I was like, are you kidding? Like, that's.
So let me give some perspective here. For those of you that maybe aren't as familiar with Mormonism, it's almost tantamount to her calling me Judas
right.
or Hitler. It's a very sharp sting, because when it comes to the Book of Mormon, few people are as vilified as Laman and Lemuel. They are the bad people. They started the whole separation between the good and the bad in the Book of Mormon. Right.
Well, and they're at their very worst, they beat their brother.
Yeah.
And an angel had to stop them.
They tried to attack him again, and the voice of God stopped them and shocked them. Then they tried to kill Nephi again. They plotted to kill their father. They plotted to kill their brother. Like we're talking about. Finally, God says, Nephi, you need to take all your people and leave, because Laman and Lemuel are coming to kill you again.
As soon as Daddy Lehi dies, the Lord tells Nephi, you've got to leave, because now that your dad is dead, your brothers are uncontrollable.
Right. There aren't a lot of names that you could use that would be more harsh when it comes to calling somebody an apostate or a bad person.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this is where I asked you, Mace, can I have your phone? Because I'm about to say something. Because that was, I mean, I get, communicating about things. Phone. No, I'm saying last night I asked you if I could have your phone. And so I said, in my text, because I was not on this thread on my phone because I didn't want it to be, and I said, leave me out of this mess. And then I jumped in anyway. And I will own that. And I said, this is Sarah, sister number 1. Do you realize you just compared your brother to Laman and Lemuel and to Cain? And then, please excuse the French, what in the actual, in all caps, now there's going to be a bleep. Bleep! Word starting with an F. I'll play. I'm assuming you are the righteous Nephi who did everything in his power to maintain a positive relationship with his brothers until they plotted to murder him. Since you are probably Abel in this lovely analogy, same thing, murder. How is your analogy anything but hurtful? It doesn't take a genius to observe. And I'm telling you right now, my words were harsh, and this is me responding in my Protect Mason brain. This is not a therapeutic response. This is Sarah hot. And trying to be objective, but very, very clear. And it says it doesn't take a genius. This is what I said. It does not take a genius to observe that you are afraid that listening to your brother speak out will harm your relationship with God. Do you really think you are so weak that listening will contaminate your brain? The Jesus I know would have listened prior to judgment. Frankly, I'm so incredibly disappointed. What happened to a simple thanks for the invite, best of luck to you? And then later she says something to the effect of, Sarah, you just solidified my reason for not listening. Our parents are on this thread and you cussed. How dare you? And I went, yeah, that really manages the thing. But I also recognize from a mental health perspective, me getting on it all wasn't going to get anywhere. And I needed to probably go for a walk instead of borrow your phone. And me using the F word is that they would cling to that instead of
in the immortal words of that sister. It just solidified why I'm not going to listen. Right. One of the issues again with high demand religions is that when you do something that is obviously offensive to them, in this case using the F word, they can't see past that.
Right.
Too often. Again, I don't want to include everybody, but much of the time they can't see past that, and I think it's because... And I'm going to say,
Mason, in my experience, they can't see past that.
In my experience, they can't see past that, and I think it's because, again, this is conjecture, I think it's because they don't want to talk about the real issues. And so the focus goes to the quote-unquote offense, I can't believe you used that word, instead of staying focused on what the issue is.
Yeah.
But in this strain, we weren't talking about the issue. We were creating issues. And that brother, that sister, they were creating issues.
And again, from their defensive brain space, like they felt like I'm going to assume they felt they were doing what God would want them to do to somebody who could potentially be attacking the church. And then I think what's really interesting and really telling here is that husband to sister number one, who is a police officer, and I think that that's important to bring up because what he did was incredibly bullying.
Yeah. I'm going to read that.
And he's been trained not to engage with people that way. Like that is, I mean, can police officers be bullies? Yes.
I think recent years have shown that that's absolutely a problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I work with police officers all the time, and I have the utmost respect for them. And I feel like that respect is very reciprocated. And what brother-in-law said, in my opinion, was incredibly childish and inflammatory and not helpful. And I want to come at this again. We don't want to disparage this human, but I think that this is a level of, this is the way that I'm going to argue because something is being threatened. Go ahead, Mason.
Well, and this is number 3. This is the one that I wanted to get to, not so much because of, in particular, what this brother-in-law said, but because of what was said. So number 3 is, this is how you shut down an argument, right? This is not how you create a discussion. It's not how you make a safe space for a discussion. What do? You call names, right? Yeah. So brother number 1 invalidates my opinion by saying I have no interest in it. That's one way. I'm just not interested in your opinion whatsoever. Let's not even have this conversation. Although he's the one that started the conversation.
Right.
So he starts the conversation and immediately goes to, I'm not interested.
Hang on, I'm going to pause you because sister number 1 messaged you privately. So on the group text, you actually have brother number 2 was the first one that
he said that I think this is great.
He was like, thanks for the invite, so on and so forth. And then the one we've identified as brother number 1 was where everything started to go south.
So, and the timeline isn't incredibly important, but simply that this is one way you shut down an argument. You invalidate the other person.
Right.
A second way to do that is to disparage the other person. And that can be done with things as childish as calling names or whatever. But that's what happened here. And so this is what he says. He says, I've never trusted or respected Sarah's opinion on anything and would never solicit advice from her.
Well, and what's interesting about this is he and I went to high school together. He was a couple years behind me. So
he doesn't know you.
Our families growing up, our dads refereed ball games together. And so, but we were never friends. We never hung out. His brother and I did. His older brother and I were friends for a little while. He was in the grade above me. But he doesn't know me. Like, we didn't hang out. He would have heard a lot of those rumors about me in high school, but there has not been a lot of interaction with this individual between he and I at all. I would say
minimal for sure.
Minimal. We've spent, since you joined the Army, we have spent hardly any time with these family members, and they've made zero effort to come out. The entire Army career, they made zero effort to ever engage in a relationship with us. I've gone to them. Right.
So anyway,
so it's very interesting that he doesn't respect my opinion based on what is my question.
So then he says, having a degree has done nothing but made her head bigger. I would never listen to her talk on a podcast as it would be the world's biggest waste of time. Nothing like exaggerating there. Mason, I've respected you for years, even though I barely know you. Well, at least he acknowledges he barely knows me.
Yeah.
I don't know why I've garnered his respect, though.
Probably because sister respects you, but sister and I don't get along.
It feels and sounds like you're willing to follow your wife anywhere and look the other way. Not sure what he's making that judgment call off of. Willful blindness, in parentheses, while she is fighting against Christ. not sure. I mean, I know there's things that you've posted, things that have been said that certainly could be perceived that way. But even knowing where you are, even you having said earlier, you don't really believe in God and certainly don't believe in Jesus Christ as a Savior, I don't think that you've done anything that I can recall that deliberately disparages someone else's belief in Jesus. And I think that that's an important piece here, is that you and I have tried to garner change, increase perspectives without devaluing what you believe. Like if you want to believe in God or Jesus Christ, we have not posted anything that I can recall. And maybe I'm missing some things, but I don't recall posting anything that minimized someone's belief in God, that disparaged them for believing in God, that told them they were wrong for believing in God. I don't recall anything like that because that is not who we are. That is not what we're about.
So I do know that I've posted some things that were questionable towards Russell M. Nelson.
Okay.
That some of what he does is very questionable and in some ways narcissistic. But towards the Savior Jesus Christ or God, I don't think so either. Mostly because my personal beliefs, I'm would identify as agnostic at this point, but as an agnostic, I have a deep respect for everybody's belief in a higher power because it can be such a good and valuable thing.
It's healing and appropriate for many people.
And then the other lovely thing is he followed his comment up with a gif of the T-Rex toy from Toy Story.
Now, this is the one from Meet the Robinsons, where it says, I have a big head and small arms. I'm just not sure how well this plan was thought out.
Lovely. So then he sends a gif of a T-Rex to then make fun of me. And one of the things that's really interesting is when I was younger, again, 20s, 18, 19, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, I did have a tendency to say things without thinking. I definitely needed to be the smartest person in the room. There was a lot of insecurity there that had been modeled for me that came out of my trauma. And it was in 2004 when I started counseling that I began to recognize how those behaviors of mine were harming the people around me and making it difficult for me to maintain healthy relationships.
Right.
The fact that he says that my master's degree made my head bigger, I find that kind of funny because for me personally, the more I learn, the less I realize I know, and the more cautious I become in how I share information. And so I would say that most of the people who know me, like who really know me, would not classify me as that at all. That was a very
right, the people that really know you.
thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so why my opinion is not valued, why I'm disliked by your family, the only thing that I could reference is that, when you and I got married, number one, I was 18 years old and just young, very young. And there was no allowance for being young
and just coming out of some trauma that none of us knew about or understood, to include you.
Right.
Like
I knew about the trauma events.
Either. Right? You knew about it.
No idea.
But you didn't understand
the significance of that trauma. And again, I think, Mason, one of the things, are you going to close with your end, what you said before you bowed out of I think that's an important thing. I'm going to have you end on that. But one of the things, because I think that that's really valuable, is that there is no safe space created within that familial dynamic. In that line of text, there's no safe space created for somebody to be in a place of struggle and to find non-judgmental, unconditional love. And I think it's the brother that we labeled number 2, because we didn't even get into brother number 3's responses, which we don't need to, but brother number 2, who had initially thanked you for the invite and then later was like, whoa, back off, calm down. We need to, let's listen to our brother's opinions. Yeah. Let's hold space for that, which I greatly appreciated. And again, we had a private conversation afterwards where we were able to reach out and say, thanks for having our back. We really appreciate that. Yeah, that went south really fast. And for them to say, hey, we've been on the receiving end of sister number one and brother number one's bullshit before. And it's painful. It's hurtful. It's really awful. And then your dad, too. Your dad kind of chimed in. And apparently he said, I listened to one of them and it was very...
Disturbing,
disturbing was the word that he used. Yeah.
But I reached out to him, just for the record, I reached out to him and I said, you're going to have to explain that a little more. And he said, you know what? That's fair. When can we talk?
Okay.
So my dad, I don't feel like he responded well in this text strain.
Right.
But my dad has been one of the people who has been the most reasonable in providing a safe space for me. And I want to give that to my dad because that hasn't always been the case.
Which is new. Because I would say even as much as 4 or 5 years ago, that's not the version that we would have gotten.
And you get a different dad from my dad than I do, which I don't like, but I do want to give him props like we did for sister number 2. I do want to give props to those people who are believing members who are able to give some space. That sister also said, hey, let's talk. And so I may call her today as well.
Well, and brother number 2, you had just had a conversation with like a few hours before. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So I think...
So the people that have provided a safe space, I'm talking to, and I'm not sharing a whole bunch of things because, again, I don't want to affect your testimony. If you're not in a place to hear these things, I don't want to do it.
Right.
Okay. So I just want to give a shout out to them that they did handle these situations well.
What I'm seeing from your dad is he has that knee-jerk amygdala response, and he says some things that are pretty painful.
Yeah.
But then give him a little time and space, and he comes back around, and he's doing a much better job at engaging and even apologizing for some of those things. And I'm really grateful for that for you. He's trying to do that with me, and honestly, I have not been ready to open that up, mostly because I'm finishing up my book that has opened up a lot of wounds from my own emotional trauma from, that time when I was in high school that we talked about.
Right.
And I'm hoping that someday we can get through that. But there's a lot more damage there because your dad has told me point blank more than once that he doesn't like me, he doesn't respect me, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And so that's very difficult. But I'd love, Mason, for you to kind of close us out with your end statement, because I really think that brought this, this is where I'm at as much as you could share, and this is why you don't know more.
Right. Well, and just let me reiterate before I do that real quick. We're here to talk about some of the toxic things that can happen in a situation like this. Too many of us have been in a situation like this. Too many of us will be in situations like this again. And my hope is that the people who are listening, usually the people that are walking away from the toxic.
Right, usually the people that are hurting.
Right, and they're the ones that are hurting and have been hurt by these kinds of things can recognize them. Recognize that oftentimes people that hurt us are in a different place and just don't understand. And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes they understand exactly what they're doing, and it hurts. It's some of the worst pain I've ever felt, and I'm not happy about it. So after this conversation kind of deteriorated, I decided I was done with it. And so this is what I said, and we'll close with this. For the record, no one on this text chain knows where I am with the church. No one. Do you know why? Because it is not safe to tell you. I'm saddened by the confirmation this text chain has provided. It remains unsafe. I hope the next time a friend comes to you with a struggle, you are more able to meet them in a healthy way. That has not been my experience. Sister number 1 did a little bit earlier, certainly not today. Dad has, and I appreciate that from him. You have jumped to conclusions you have no basis for. Thanks to sister number 2 for asking real questions without accusation. I extended an invitation. I gave each of you an easy way out. It could have stayed there. I can't handle the attacks right now. I'm done with this conversation. And I think that why that was important to me is I took the chance to just kind of re-emphasize the fact that I was not trying to force anybody into anything they're not comfortable with, and then set a boundary. And I think that we intend to talk, I think you intend to talk with somebody else about
I have
boundaries.
a guest coming on about boundaries, yeah.
For guests, and boundaries can be incredibly important. They're vital to our health.
Well, they're very protective.
Because they protect us from the things that we can't tolerate or can't handle now. Boundaries don't have to be ironclad. They can change over time. They can change as people change. And these conversations aren't over. But I just want to share that I'm feeling with you. I'm feeling with you. I'm feeling with my wife in a way I haven't felt before, because the pain is real. And it's something I hoped I didn't have to deal with. And yet here I am. And so I just want to say I love you. I hope that you can find a place for your pain. I hope that you can process it appropriately and come to a peaceful place for yourself.
Thank you, Mason, for being vulnerable with us today. I know that took a lot of courage.
Well, I don't really like crying, and some of that's going on now, so that's...
Crying allows you to complete that emotional cycle.
I'm just letting the extra sodium out of my body.
And cortisol.
Sure. So thank you, you all. We love you. Thanks for being here with us today.
Unpacking Mormonism is hosted by me, Sarah Westbrook, produced by Alex Vidalas. Our music today was by Lorenzo Emanuel, and I Hope You Know by John Worthy Music.
Yes, I am. If I was a steak, I would be lightly seared.
I wouldn't say lightly seared. I'd say you were like burned to a crisp on the outside and raw in the middle still.